Welcome to Manifested Publishers.
Hello learners, I'm happy to welcome you to our today's learning session. I'm glad, that's why you see I'm smiling, learners, to welcome you to our today's lesson. The subject is geography, and we are still on the topic statistical methods. We have been discussing the methods that we use in collecting data. We listed several methods. On top of the list is questionnaires. So far, we have defined questionnaires. We have highlighted the factors that influence the way a questionnaire is prepared. We, in our last lesson, learned about the advantages of questionnaires. Today, we will study disadvantages of questionnaires. The subject, geography, topic, statistical methods. Learners, welcome to our today's lesson. Our lesson is brief. We will study the disadvantages of using questionnaires in collection of data. So by the end of the lesson, you should be able to state the disadvantages of questionnaires in the process of collecting data. Disadvantage number one. The first disadvantage is that costs of collecting data using questionnaires is higher compared to certain methods, other methods. Costs like traveling expenses. So because learners, the researcher has to sometimes travel to go and meet respondents. Travel from point A to point B, from respondent A to respondent B to respondent C. Traveling expenses do what? They inflate research costs. Traveling costs, learners, traveling costs inflate research costs. That is a disadvantage. A researcher has to travel from respondent to the next respondent to the other respondent, and by so doing, the traveling costs are inflated. They are increased. Again, this method, disadvantage number two, related to the cost, there is a disadvantage of time. A lot of time is required in movement, okay? Movement from point A to point B. You need time. So a lot of time is also required. A lot of time is also lost. Let me use the word lost. A lot of time is lost in movement. That's a disadvantage. A lot of time is lost in movement. The researcher has to move. The more respondents he visits, the more time is lost. That is a disadvantage. Then number three, the third disadvantage is that the questionnaires may not be effective where the respondent is illiterate. The questionnaires may not be effective where the respondents are illiterate. Because we say sometimes the researcher has to structure the questions, then send to the respondents. So if the respondents are illiterate, meaning they are not able to read, then they will not effectively answer the questions. Because before you answer a question that is written, a respondent has to do what? Has to read. But if the respondent is unable to read, then the answers that he may give will not be effective. May not be effective. So that is a disadvantage of using questionnaires. That means that if you are to use questionnaires, then you need to ensure that the respondents are literate. All right? If you are a researcher and you want to gather information from people, these people you need to ensure that the people are able to read and also write, because there are times when they are expected to write when answering the questions, written questions, because written questions will require written responses. The questionnaire may not be effective where the respondents are illiterate, or where, we can also say, or where there is a language barrier. Let me add, or where there is a language barrier, or where there is a language barrier. For example, the language that is used, if your questionnaire is structured in English language and the respondents are conversant with the Swahili language, then you see the questionnaire method will not be effective. Is that clear? All right. Number 4. What is the next disadvantage? The next disadvantage is in relation to the posting or mailing of the questionnaires. Mailed questionnaires usually bring back insincere and inaccurate responses. Mailed questionnaires usually do what? Usually bring back insincere and inaccurate responses. Mailed questionnaires usually, not always, but usually bring back insincere and inaccurate responses. If you are mailing or posting questionnaires to respondents, then because the researcher may not be available to engage the respondent on one-on-one. Because if you are to engage a respondent on one-on-one, then you will be able to read inaccurate responses through body language. But if you are mailing, then you will not be able to see insincerity in the responses of the respondent. Is that clear, learners? Mailed questionnaires usually bring back insincere and inaccurate responses. And this is especially where opinion questions are involved. Especially where opinion questions are involved. Let me add, especially where opinion questions are involved. If you are seeking opinion from respondents, then respondents may give opinion that is not sincere. Opinion should be contrasted with fact. If you are asking respondents for their opinion, then they may not give their own opinion. They may give insincere responses. And sometimes you may even get contradicting responses from a respondent. Right? Because, learners, the researcher is not available to seek for clarification where mailed questionnaires are involved, are used. Because you send the questionnaire, then you wait for the respondent to email back. That may take 2 or 3 days or 1 week. But if it is one-on-one, then you can seek clarification from the respondent. Or where the respondent has not understood the question, then you can restructure the question. Or you can give what we call supplementary questions to get more information from the respondent. So, but with mailed questionnaires, you may have contradicting responses, which may render the research findings very difficult to analyze. Am I communicating, learners? I'm communicating in English language. The good thing, learners, as even though you are not able to give me feedback, I know by this time you are not illiterate. There is no language barrier between me and you because you are able to understand and also communicate in English language. So when I say opinion questions, I know you understand what I'm saying. When I say insincere, I know you also understand what I'm talking about. So this is disadvantage number 4. Moving on to disadvantage number 5, we are learning the disadvantages of using questionnaires in collecting data. Another point is in relation to mailed questionnaires. So learners, when questionnaires when mailed may never reach the respondent. Questionnaires when mailed may never reach the respondent. So if you have sent the questionnaires say by email. There is no guarantee that the respondent will receive the letter or the mail. Or when you post through, when you send it as a parcel, there is no guarantee that parcel will reach the respondent. When sent through the post office, for example, there is no guarantee that the questionnaires will be received by the respondent. And assuming they have been received, learners, some of those who receive may not bother to send them back. Some may not even answer the questions. There are those who will answer the questions, but they will not send back the responses. So that is a disadvantage of using mailed questionnaires. And there are various reasons why the questionnaires may not be received by the respondent. For example, a mail may get lost along the way. Okay? When you send a parcel, it may be misplaced. So these are some of the disadvantages of using questionnaires, learners. So you see, and that becomes very difficult for the researcher, because if a researcher has a target of, say, collecting data from 100 respondents, and he sends out the letters or the questionnaires, the respondents may not, all of them may not send back the responses. And that becomes disadvantageous to the researcher. It becomes a disadvantage to the researcher. So questionnaires as a method of gathering or collecting information has advantages and disadvantages. In our last lesson, we learned about the advantages. In our today's lesson, we've covered the disadvantages of questionnaires as a method of collecting data. We have given 5 points. Point number 1, we've learned that traveling costs inflate research costs because the researcher may be required to move from point A to point B, from respondent A to respondent B. That movement is expensive. Number 2, a lot of time is also lost in movement. The more the researcher travels, the more time is lost. Number 3, the questionnaires may not be effective where the respondents are illiterate or where there is a language barrier. All right. Number 4, mailed questionnaires usually bring back insincere and inaccurate responses, especially where opinion questions are involved. Then lastly, we've stated that questionnaires, when mailed, may never reach the respondent, and also some of those who receive may not bother to send back the questionnaires. So that will mark the end of our today's lesson. I want you to go through the lesson once more. Then you answer this question, which I'm calling revision question. Revision question. state 5 disadvantages of using questionnaires to collect data. When answering this question, please make sure your exercise book is closed, the video is closed. Try and answer the question from your memory. Test your recall. Try and see if you are able to remember the points without referring to your notes. Thank you, learners, for attending our today's lesson. In our next lesson, we are going to study the second technique, the second method of collecting data, which is interviews. We learn about interviews. Remember, on our list that we gave on methods of collecting data, interviews featured in that list, and so we are going to study interviews as a method of collecting data. Bye-bye.